I'm really excited about this conversation because I love when folks not really introduce ideas, but reintroduce ideas to the mainstream and blow every faction's brains. Like they can't process the idea of their reality and their narratives being broken. Vicky Osterweil is the author of In Defense of Looting, a riotous history of uncivil action. In Defense of Looting is a history of violent protests sparking social change, a compelling reframing of revolutionary activism, and a practical vision for a dramatically restructured society. Vicky, thank you for joining us. Oh, you're on mute. Darn Zooms.
Of course, it's classic. Thank you so much for having me. We're 6 months into the quarantine. I still can't press the button. Hi.
Listen, I do it every day, so
yeah.
I should know better. Okay, so I think having this conversation now, I mean, especially as voting is underway with a president now supposedly in quarantine, with the debates, the first debate having been done, Biden astroturfing his way to hopefully a victory, I guess. You had mentioned that you don't believe justice will be found in the ballot box. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, on the one hand, we are obviously facing a crisis for the constitutional system as it has been, as it has existed since the Civil War, that is sort of threatened by Trump. But yeah, I don't think that any reforms can actually transform that come through voting can actually transform the fundamental anti-blackness and white supremacy of the system.
So. The system is, built literally on what you just said. It's built on white supremacy. Our police forces are, even in the government, I've said this over and over on the show, the FBI is investigating police departments across the country for white supremacy, organizing cells within the police department. Of course, the police was set up to basically control slaves. So just what you're saying here, that element has been left out of the narrative. But then the other aspect you bring up is that looting is a form of social justice. Can you explain?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think, one of the things that's been interesting about, as you said, breaking everyone's brain with this take is that we just lived through one of the largest uprisings in American history, which saw looting occurring in every major city and many, many minor cities in the country. So I think what upset people was that anyone would defend it and make an argument for it, because clearly a lot of people are doing it. So it's a tactic that immediately appeals to people as a way for striking back against the police and in the face of their terrorism and their murder. And the reason I argue that it does that is because it gets to the history of the intersection of whiteness, property, and the police, which are all reinforcing ideas, reinforcing combined forces in the United States, both historically and in the present. So when folks rising up against the police and against white supremacy loot, they are directly and immediately attacking that link, and that freaks people out.
So when this is all happening and we're looking at businesses across the country, small businesses start putting signs in their windows saying, we support BLM, we're a small business, we're Black owned, we're female, whatever it is. There was like a long list. They were making the case to looters, like, skip us, go to Walmart, or right. Skip us, go to like the big box stores. Is there really a strategy like that, or is that something that just sort of played out naturally? No,
that happened in the 60s as well, during the urban unrest. And often what happens is, because people who are rioting and looting, like, they live in those communities where it's happening, and they know the businesses where, it's actually a local person who like runs it. They tend to know, where people are exploited, where people are getting minimum wage work or getting followed by security. They live in these communities. They tend to know which businesses are actually malicious and which aren't. And so, like, maybe some of them are minority owned, but that person like lives way outside the community. And like, there's a lot of different tactics that go into it. And a lot of the opposition that I think liberals in particular, but also on the left, like to provide is like, what about small businesses? But that's a dodge, because the question is, what is happening in this country that the police can murder Black people with impunity on camera and get away? And the people who say, what about small businesses? They don't suddenly cheer on looters in Chicago, for example, when they went down to the Magnificent Mile and attacked the Gucci and the Tesla. They weren't suddenly like, yes, this is the action I want. They're opposed to looting in general. Small businesses is a moral argument that they can make to defend themselves from it. So yes, I think that the looters and rioters, they're a part of the community. They know which businesses act more or less, oppressively in their communities, and they react accordingly.
So what is it about looting that is an actual tactic against police?
Yeah, so basically the police exist, as you mentioned. They sort of first form around the plantation and in colonial places to basically protect white property from the threat of, in the U.S. and in the South in particular, black people escaping the plantation and therefore destroying white property. So the police have always existed to protect white property. In the North, they were often mostly enforcing fugitive slave laws. They also would crack down on unions. So in the present, what the police do is they protect property. They protect private property. It's what they do. They don't protect people, which I think is very, very clear to anyone who's been paying attention for the last 10 years. And so when you attack, when you create a space without police, then suddenly you can have things for free, right? That's what looting demonstrates, is that in a riot zone where the police control is no longer present, you can share all of the commodities that are available in the city, all the food, all the nice things that you otherwise have no access to become available, because once the police have been pushed out, then the myth that is property and private property as it is owned and constructed now is revealed for what it is, which is just that, a myth.
You go back to the LA riots, right? And there were these images of communities being pitted against each other. The Korean community in the I forgot what the name of the street is in LA. I can't remember, but Central LA, someone's gonna yell at me now. They were out there protecting their small businesses, and it created it really pitted people against each other. Was that a media narrative, or did that? You saw the imagery, but
absolutely. So one of the causing factors of the LA riots was the murder of Latasha Harlan, who was a 15-year-old black girl who went into a small immigrant-owned business run by a Korean woman, and she murdered her for stealing an orange juice, and the money for the orange juice was in Latasha Harlan's hand. And then she was let off with community service for cold-blooded murder in her business. So that was one of the causes of the LA riots. As a result, a lot of the conflict in LA was with Korean businesses, which tended to be small Korean business owners were very, very concentrated in South LA. But I think one of the things that's really important about the book and the argument I make is to look at the tactics that people use, right? So when we talk about things like communal violence, right? So rioting, anti-Muslim rioting in India, for example, what rioters focus on is murdering people, hurting people, burning down private homes. In LA, there was this one, there were a few famous gun battles between Korean store owners and rioters, but black rioters didn't kill Korean people. That wasn't the goal of the riot. They weren't attacking maybe their businesses, but they weren't committing violence against people for the most part, and a lot of those fights that they captured were instigated, and then it became an instance of and in any case that occasionally fights broke out, but for the most part, I think you can really just watch the tactics that the majority of people are doing to see the goals of the movement that's present. And I think what we saw in LA, even though many Korean businesses were attacked, people were largely not being attacked. And so the media hopped on the three big instances of people being attacked that they caught on video, right. The beating of Reginald Denny, very famously at an intersection, and that gunfight between the Korean shop owners. Yeah. It was really them shooting. There wasn't anyone shooting back in that video, I think, if you look. But I don't remember. In any case, so the media will zoom in on any interpersonal violence it can to try and paint the whole movement that way.
So how does this move the needle? I mean, if we're in an election where a good chunk of the population, even if is not swayed by these arguments, even on the Democratic side, and God forbid, somebody is swung by this argument in the wrong direction in a key swing state, as we saw in the last election, few thousand people determined the election, not to mention a lot of people staying home. But Donald Trump this seems like an argument. This is Bret Stephens' point, which I never agree with, but I'll reference it.
Yeah.
Bret Stephens' point was essentially that this gives, this is arming Donald Trump with another argument against the left. And of course, Joe Biden basically echoed that.
Yeah, absolutely. Liberals are not very happy about this argument being made in public. But I think, for one thing, I'm not focused on electoral politics, since I don't think justice can come that way. I also don't think that we can focus our arguments on how it might affect a news cycle. But also, I think one of the facts of this summer was that the uprising was a huge and maybe permanent blow to Trump's popularity. Mm-hmm. And the uprising was incredibly popular. And it was more popular than Trump. It was more popular than Biden. And so the idea that then arguing that the uprising was good, which is, my book's really a history book. Like, it's not really, but like I'm just trying to think through the uprisings that we were actually living through. And by arguing on behalf of them, these uprisings that are popular, the idea that is giving Trump ammunition rather than 4 centuries of settler colonialism, the history of slavery, an election system that's rigged, that he loses an election by 3 million people and comes to power, just like George W. Bush before. And now even that's not enough. He's going to lose this one anyway. So he's already planning to do basically a de facto coup. The idea that making radical arguments is ammunition for the right. is I think obscene, frankly.
I couldn't agree more. And the fact that liberals respond to it, and I mean, immediately watching this stage of the debate, the things that Biden was able to get out of his mouth were defenses to the terms that Trump was setting. So it's infuriating. But how does it move the needle?
Well, so far I've made most of the people I don't like in this country angry, which is a very happy. I did not anticipate having all that power, so that was really
Who's
nice.
Your favorite one?
Oh God, Newt Gingrich probably. Newt Gingrich getting in his feelings was pretty good. Bill Maher was also very satisfying.
Oh, did he profile this?
Oh yeah.
I can't. I stopped watching him. I can't.
I haven't. I couldn't keep track. People keep telling me people I didn't know about, but I think Newt Gingrich was. I was hoping it would give Henry Kissinger a stroke and he would die, and like I would have. Anyway, but I think now I've forgotten the question because I was doing a joke.
Sorry, how is it moving the nudie needle?
Oh yeah. Well, I think I think who I was hoping to talk to were people in the movement who genuinely support the goals of police reform or abolition, who genuinely support the transformation away from this settler colonial and white supremacist society, but who look at looting and rioting and think that's too far, or I don't know, or I feel uncomfortable, or I don't understand why this happens. So the book isn't really pointed towards the people in the media who are going to hate it anyway because they want to defend property. It's for people in the movement and people who are curious about the movement to think about the ways this tactic emerges and to push back against this knee-jerk and, in my opinion, anti-Black response to looting, since looting has really, and I've traced this as a whole chapter, the final chapter in my book, looting has become a very effective dog whistle since the 60s. And so I think that trying to push back on that was really important to me.
On that note, it was weird to see that there was this moment where liberals, I think they were trying to balance, and even CNN to an extent, every day was like their message changed because it's like, well, we have to be pro-BLM. We know that now. Right. But this is really crazy. We don't know who's behind this. And then came in like, well, we think that there might be some like foreign instigators in the country looting. Is there any evidence of that? I mean, do you have any?
No, I mean, there's no evidence. And the outside agitator thing didn't even work that well because it was everywhere. Outside agitators is a pretty effective lie. It goes all the way back to slavery. I trace this in my book. On the plantation, slave owners would say, "Oh, the enslaved would be happy if only these terrible people from the North didn't come and convince them they were real human beings." So the outside agitator myth has always been deeply, deeply racist and anti-Black from its very beginnings. I think it goes back further. Actually, I think it even goes to colonial struggles. But anyway, so this time the outside agitator trope didn't work because the uprising was everywhere. So it was really hard to like, where is there like a incredible Antifa farm in Nebraska where they're like sending out like planes full of soup or whatever it is, you know? It's just not like, it doesn't make any sense. So the outside agitator thing, like they tried that for a while. It didn't really stick. So then they turned to the white anarchist line, right? And the white anarchist line is a more complicated version of the outside agitator trope because it erases black anarchists, it erases black radicals. It implies that only white people are political actors while simultaneously imagining that only a certain kind of troublemaker, oh my God, my cat is the worst. She literally broke into the room. Okay. Only a certain kind of troublemaker could possibly like want to be doing this in the first place. So like the white agitator line really, the white anarchist line became sort of the outside agitator boogeyman. And we're seeing the New York Times reproduce that again. They just had another hit piece in their op-ed a few days ago. So it goes on. Yeah.
I mean, with that being said, like there were definitely activists and leaders, community leaders, Black women in particular, like they were taking a stand. I saw several videos where they were calling out others for agitating and for looting, and you know, like there was a strategy and they were like going away from the strategy, and it was changing the conversation away from their agenda. I mean, this is natural, obviously, in movements. There's a lot of different organizations and folks out there. I mean, do you buy into that like they have one strategy that they think is going to be very effective and the looters are canceling that strategy out or hurting it?
I'm not sure. I believe them. I believe when they say that's how they're experiencing it. I don't think a strategy that looters could cancel out would be very effective, personally, especially considering this uprising started with 3 days of rioting and looting in Minneapolis that led to the burning down of a police precinct. And that direct action caused it to spread to the entire country. So I'm not very sympathetic to the idea that looting and rioting hurts the movement. But I also want to speak, those are people I want to talk to and have a conversation with. Those are the people this book is for. It's like I understand it. You're concerned about the movement. You want it to work. You want to win. And you think looting and rioting doesn't work. And so my argument is, look, historically, there has never been a liberation movement that hasn't involved more direct attacks on property, on whiteness than just nonviolent protest. And we can't control a movement in such a way where none of that can happen. It won't work and we won't win. That's the argument that I'm making. But it is to those people because I'm sympathetic and I understand that there are people who genuinely want to win who get frustrated in the street when they see this happening. So it's in solidarity with them that I offer the critique.
You know, I wasn't in New York when the majority of the looting was happening during the George Floyd protests, and I was expecting to go back to the city in Manhattan and see, you know, Fifth Avenue stores like boarded up and spray paint, but it basically just looked like Fifth Avenue because these are very large companies that like 3 days later, when cleaned up, put in new windows, could afford it. Mm-hmm. You know, the arguments that I was hearing in certain circles and in the New York Times, in the Nation of all places, was this is really going to damage the economy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, the goal.
It's okay. We're a pet friendly show.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's quarantine. There's no controlling it.
You can't. My dog barks the other day.
She's going to knock it over or something. She's going to take it. Sorry, baby. So yeah, I think you know the idea that it would damage the economy, that a little bit of rioting, I think is erroneous. Obviously, I mean, I think we saw that it didn't. But I think what they are scared about ultimately is that people would be able to reproduce their lives without having to go to work and without having to pay rent. That's the ultimate thing. That's the horizon that looting points towards and rioting, which is an idea that we would actually live outside of a capitalist economy, which our planet needs desperately. Not only do we need as individuals, not only do Black people need for liberation, not only do Indigenous folks need for justice and for land back, but we need it because the planet is going to die. Like it couldn't be more urgent that we live outside that economy. So when they talk about, oh, looting hurts the economy, it's not true in the immediate, although they may be thinking about in 77, the blackout looting in New York was used as an excuse by many business owners to not return to escape the city. That happened in Detroit in the 68 as well. A lot of people still blame the riots for destroying Detroit when the rest of the Rust Belt also went down in the same period. So it's a common trope. It's not really true that a riot that we have of the scope that we have seen can actually destroy the economy. But I think they are right to be frightened that the horizon it points to is a city without an economy in which we live together in solidarity and flourishing.
It's interesting I've never thought about it from that perspective. New York is obviously facing a down economy. Its unemployment's at 16% right now in the city. And looking back, I'm curious to see if we make it through climate change, if 20 years from now, folks are going to blame it on the uprisings and the looting rather than the fact that people are moving out because COVID it's too hard to manage in so many different ways. Yeah. Vicky, fascinating arguments. I think people are empowered. There's a lot of ammunition here to fight back. You've definitely broken my brain a little bit, and hopefully we can have you on again soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. I live for breaking brains, so I'm so glad. I live to serve. Yeah.
Vicky Osterweil, in defense of looting. There's a really great. By the way, I just want to promote this. There's a really great interview with you in the New Yorker from September 3rd, just a few weeks ago. Actually, it was a month ago now. I definitely urge people to check it out. We can put that link in the information section because I thought you were able to answer his questions very well. So
thank you. Yeah, it was a bit of a surprise gotcha, but it went out okay. It went okay in the end.
You handled yourself well.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.